Hi everybody, today we're going to learn how to make silicone molds. So what that means is this is a type of rubber mold. So it is reusable, so you can make multiple objects, multiple wax objects with these molds. So if you feel like making 100 glass fill in the blank, this is the process that will allow you to do that. So I decided to pick an object that is representative of me. So for example, I hurt myself a lot. I'm a very clumsy human. It's ridiculous actually. So with that being said, I decided to make a mold of bandages. So those kind that you can wrap around and that'll stick to your skin whenever you have injured yourself. I decided to pick this because yes, it represents how much I hurt myself, but also it has a really interesting texture that I want to capture in glass. So just keep in mind, in glass, what you see is what you get. So it will pick up this really cool fine texture here. So before we start, we're gonna look at our objects and kind of see if there are any voids that need to be filled. Remember the 6mm rule. So glass does not want to flow into anything that is smaller than 6mm. Also, if your object has a really big void or something, like mine does, so I'm gonna look at it through this end, there's a big hole. That's not gonna work. I need to make this solid. So what I have done is I have taken a little bit of wax and I've just filled in the top void. I only filled in this top part because this bottom part is going to be adhered to the board. So that way, whenever I'm making my silicone mold, it does not shift and does not move. So now we are going to walk over to the wax station and I'm going to show you how to secure this to the board so that it does not move when you're making your mold. My fabulous assistant Sherry is going to walk with the camera over here with me. All right, I'm just going to take a very small ladle. And for this, I do not need a lot. I do not need to put an entire ladle or anything. I just need a tiny little bit. I'm gonna put it in the center of my board, pour it down, take my object, and just kind of make sure that it gets on the bottom and on the board. Let it sit for a couple seconds. All right, so I can give it a gentle wiggle. It's not going anywhere, so it is good to go. Now we're gonna walk back over to the table and we can start making our silicone molds. So, before we get officially started, there are a couple things that you're going to need to make your silicone mold. So, firstly, silicone. You're going to need a tube of silicone and a caulking gun. You're also going to need dish soap, mold release, petroleum jelly, and a bucket filled with water, rubber bands, a Sharpie, and a utility knife and or box cutter. So, with our object, something that we need to keep in mind is we want to ultimately be able to get the silicone molds off. So if you've ever used silicone before, this is just window silicone, like the kind that you use to close cracks on window sills. So if you've ever played with it before, you know that it is very tacky, which is great because we build our molds in layers. We want the layers to stick to each other, but we do not want the silicone to stick to our object for forever. So what we're going to do, we're going to use our mold release to prevent that from happening. So whenever I spray my mold release, I like to come over to the plaster mixing station just because it's really not that great to inhale for you. So I just like to be cautious of this. I'm gonna turn on the ventilation. Wait for it to start up. And then I'm going to spray one layer. Rotate my board to get all the sides. I'm gonna let it chill out for a little bit. Make sure it kind of sets. I can test it by like touching a tiny little area, not a lot because you don't want to take the mold release off. So it's not really wet anymore. I'm not getting any residue on my finger. I'm gonna spray one more time. All right, that should be good. Now I'm going to turn off the ventilation because I'm no longer over here. We're going to come back to our workstation. We're going to be good to get started. So what I like to remember is, like I said, I want the silicone to stick to my object will ultimately come off. However, I also want the same for the board. Now, I know that I sprayed mold release. There's probably a little bit on the board, but just to be safe, what I like to do is get petroleum jelly, get a napkin. You don't have to use a napkin for this. It's just to apply the petroleum jelly to the board. I just don't like the way it feels on my hands. So I do not need a lot, excuse me. Little dot, place it on the board. Now I want to put it close to my object, like to the base of my object, not directly on it, but just close. I'm going to go around my entire object, cover about, let's say 3/4 of an inch to an inch with petroleum jelly. That's a little bit of overkill, but I know for your first molds, on silicone molds, sometimes people make things a little thick, a little too thick on accident. So we just want to be safe, rather be safe than sorry. So now another thing that I'm going to do, one of the corners close to me, I am going to do the same thing. I'm going to take a little bit of petroleum jelly, very small amount. You need the thinnest layer possible, nothing too crazy. And I am going to rub this into one of my corners, and we will find out why in a second. Just kind of rub it. That's great. Okay. Now, since silicone is very sticky, we need a release for our hands because we use our hands to put this material on. Some people like to wear gloves because they have sensitive skin, which is totally fine. If you want to wear gloves, wear gloves. In my case, because of the way I am as a human, I find it easier for me not to use gloves and to just use my hands. But either way, what we have here is a bucket of water. I've added some Dawn dish soap. You do not need a lot, you just need to be able to make suds. So that is what this is for. So I'm going to pour a little bit more, just because I already tested this and I know that it's not the consistency that I need it to be. So we'll just do a little bit. So 1, 2, 3. I like to count the seconds that I pour just so I can keep track and record for future, for whenever I make these molds again in the future. I'm gonna take my hand and just mix it. Now you want your fingers to feel lubricated. You don't want them to feel, you don't want your hands to feel sticky because you put so much Dawn dish soap in there. Then it's just sticky on sticky. Let's see. So the way I like to think about it is, for example, whenever you are, let's say you're cooking something and you use a little bit of oil and you get oil on your hands on accident. I like to think of it like that. You know how your hands are just a little bit greasy? That's what you want with this, except it's dish soap, so it's not that gross. You smell nice afterwards. So this is good. Wipe off some of the suds. This is why paper towels were invented. Sorry, trees. Okay, now, here's for the fun part. We're going to take our silicone. Some people like to lay this directly onto their object. I do not, because I find it hard for me to see how thick I am making this object. Like, see how thick of the first layer I'm making for this object. So I feel like I have a little more control whenever I squeeze some of the silicone into the corner. Into the corner that I put my petroleum jelly on. I do this because whenever this stuff sets, it wants to stick to things, remember? So I just like to put a little bit of petroleum jelly in the corner, just so that way I can just peel it off whenever this whole process is done. Now, what I'm going to do, I always have some paper towels next to me, just in case my hands are not lubricated enough. That way I can just wipe my hands off get the silicone off of my hands, and then I can go again and test things out with the water, the consistency of the soap water. So I'm going to get my entire hand lathered up. I'm not going to be using my entire hand, just my fingers, but you'll notice that sometimes your hand will slip and you might fall into your hand might touch the pile of silicone, then you'll have a sticky spot on your hand, your palm of your hand. So I just like to be aware. So this should be good. Now I can pick up my silicone, and it's not really sticking to my fingers because it's a lubricant. So I just took a tiny dollop. I like to start from the bottom and work my way up. That way, if I want to see how thick I'm making my first layer, I have a bird's eye view and I'm not guessing. So took a little bit and we just tap, lightly tap. I don't like to use my fingertips. This little knuckle bone right here, I find that it helps, it does a little bit better job of just being able to move the silicone around. Now for this, you do not want a thick layer. For example, a 1/4 inch layer is too thick, way too thick. The layer that you want may be 3 millimeters at max. Now I know that's a really small amount, and you're like, how do I know what 3 millimeters is? Look at a ruler. You don't have to go with the ruler and measure. Just kind of eyeball it, and you want a very thin skin. Ultimately, with almost all molds, again, you're gonna go back and forth, lubricating your fingertips. So ultimately with all molds, the first layer is kind of just a skin. It's a detail layer. That's what this is, but in silicone. So starting from the bottom, I like to go all the way around. Now, I'm not just staying at the bottom as well. Like, I'm kind of moving the material up so that way I can get more coverage, right? Lubricate my hands. So if you don't want a bunch of stringy bits whenever you're trying to move the silicone and grab a bit, you can just pull up and do this little twisty thing. Stay, and you're good. So that way you just have like a little ball of silicone. Now something to keep in mind is the whole point of the water and the dish soap, it's just to act as a release from your fingers to the silicone. You do not need to drench your silicone in soapy water, because if you do that, the layers of your silicone mold, it's going to take a lot longer for the material to set. So silicone uses the surrounding air to cure.